Let's go ahead and get started this morning. Galatians chapter 5. Brother Roy, it's always good to see you. You know that. Will you open us in a word of prayer this morning, please?
Father, we thank you this morning. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your presence with us, Lord. Out there on those crazy highways and that. Father, it's a crazy life down here. You know that. We just thank you for your presence, your safety, peace that you can give us, Lord. Guide us now as we listen to the word of God and tell us, Father, and help us to chew on it spiritually and learn, Father, today. We pray for the shut-ins. Father, we pray for the hearts that are indifferent. Just turn them to thee. In Jesus' name.
Galatians chapter 5. The plan was to look at verses 1 through 6, and 1 through 5, and then 6 through 11. Can you turn me down just a little bit, Jade? Now, happy birthday, by the way, Jade. Now, next week, work is taking me out, and I don't want to have a gap in between. So, Ben, I'm going to try to push them all together and go 1 through 11 this morning, and then we'll always reference back. So, Galatians chapter 5, we're going to look at 1 through pretty much verse 11, verse 12. Let's see where we left off last week. Last week we made a couple statements. One, that chapter 5 has a great change. It is the place where Paul begins to apply the doctrine that he defended and described. And that's always Paul's pattern. Paul lays out the doctrine, usually calls it even the foundation, and then he gets to the place where Paul is king of the therefores. Therefore, now that you have the doctrine, therefore, let me tell you how it's going to affect your behavior. And this is where he's getting to in this letter to the church of the Galatians right now, church of Galatia right now. The doctrine he's dealing with through this entire book is justification by faith. He closed out chapter 4 with two great pictures so that you could understand, and those two pictures were of Isaac and Ishmael. There's Isaacs and Ishmaels inside the body, and that's what he was talking about. Isaacs are those who are Isaacs because they're born of faith. Isaacs are those who were born and that birth was a miracle. Isaacs are those in that miracle birth. It's a new birth. Things are new, things are changed, things are now possible, and the great benefit of being an Isaac is you're joint heir with Christ. As opposed to that, you have Ishmael. Ishmael is not of faith. Ishmael is of man's efforts, what man can make happen. He is not an heir. He's illegitimate. His life is not miracle and new life and abundant. It's a life of constant striving and trying and effort and failure. And in the end, the life of Ishmael is cursed. The life of Ishmael is a doomed life. So he closes out this picture, and then he goes on to give us this idea that between these two pictures, Ishmael and Isaac, you got to understand, Isaac is the better way to go. If you put him there is no comparison. Isaac is by far the better way to go. Ishmael is not where you want to be, ending up doomed. However, the challenge, there you go, there's your picture, but Ishmael is going to persecute the Isaacs. Law is going to persecute faith. The false is going to persecute the real. And he dives right in on that picture, and he says these things are going to happen. Now, we drew it to its next step, and it comes basically in this passage from verse 9. A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. Talking about, and what's he talking about? He's talking about legalism. He's talking about Ishmael. A little Ishmael messes up the whole thing. And how does that happen? How does that pressure happen? We kind of work through that a little bit, but what happens is the leaven comes in, and the real, the air, the faith, Dr. Boyer, gives in. The pressure comes, the vice ties, and real gives in to false. And by doing that, real puts itself back into bondage. Now, we used a picture of a horse being tied to the grinding wheel. Doesn't go anywhere. There's its life. It just doesn't get anything done every day. Feels like, I got a whole lot done. What's next tomorrow? Well, you got nothing done because you got to do the same thing over and over again. It's constant striving. It's constant work. It's constant effort. But I probably should have used this one since Paul used the illustration of prison. Being in bondage is being in prison. It is this. Brother Andy, it's like Christ would come and he would unlock the gate and he would say, now you're free. And so you step out of this jail cell and you look right over there and you know what you see? Another jail cell. So you go running right over into it and say, nope, I'd rather be right here. And that's what he's doing. He's writing to the church of Galatia. He says, this is how you're living. You've gone from one jail cell to another. You're putting yourself back into bondage. Why would you do that? And the reason is fear. The challenge rolled up to be this way. And if we really are honest, we know this. Dr. Bohr, I've talked about freedom for I don't know how many weeks now. This is probably like 12 weeks. And I haven't had to sit out there. If I had to listen to myself, every time I heard the word, you're free, you're new, it's changed, it's possible, I'd be going. Because there is something scary about freedom not being controlled. And so you get to the place of not controlled. Well, what's the first thing you want to do? We want to put it right back under control. And lack of you know what you do with people with lack of self-control? You put them in jail where they're controlled. And so the first thing we want to do is put them back in jail, put them back in prison. But we're missing the point, and this is where Paul's going to get to in the upcoming weeks, because I'm slow. The point is, Brother Roy, he did not leave us with no control. Okay? He made all things new. He gave us a new heart, and he let his Spirit dwell within us. And then he said, that which I've begun, I will finish. I'll perfect it. I will bring it to completion. But that's still scary. And it is hard to walk in that faith. And it is much easier to put, because this is what happens. I don't put myself in bondage. I put you in bondage. Let me help you control yourself. Here's a little law. Let me help you control yourself. Here's a little law. But the challenge, when I give you a little law, I've taken you from his plan, which is his Spirit, and looking at him, and dwelling and growing in him. And so this is the challenge. This is what Paul is dealing with. To that, it brings us back to where we're going to be this morning, Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Right here. Been huge. Stand fast. Not an option. What I'm about to talk about is crucial. It is the very heart of who and what you are. It's not, okay, well, we need to grab a little bit of liberty. No, everything depends on the liberty, on the doctrine of the freedom of the believer. In fact, if you go back to chapter 1, that's why he said, when you start adding outside control, you make him of none effect, and he uses the word anathema. So he's bringing this picture in, and in fact, let me. How strong is this word stand fast? Well, you know, I'm not very smart, so I just look it up. Stand fast. Where is this word used somewhere else? It's used in Corinthians chapter 16. Eric, did you get that for me? Yes. Watch ye, stand fast, same word. You know what's funny about this? Doug, if you look at that, you'll see by the time we get to the end this morning, if we get to the end this morning, he's encouraging them to stand fast in the same thing. Chapter 5, stand fast in the liberty wherewith you are called, the freedom that you've been given. But you're going to see that freedom is based upon living the life of faith, not works. Look what he's telling them in Corinthians to stand fast. Watch ye, stand fast in the faith. And then he steps up and says, be strong, act like a guy, act like grown, act like you're mature. Which, if we go through chapter 4 of Galatians, guess what the whole thing is about? When you grow up, you don't any longer need a schoolmaster. Because you're mature. Now that you're mature, surrender, seek, follow, obey. Same thing. By the way, if you go to Romans Same thing. If you go to Colossians, same thing. Miss Kathy, you know what I mean by that? This is everybody's struggle. It is the struggle. Hebrews, what are we trying? Walk in faith. But it is so much easier to do what we can do. It is the question that is always asked. Tell me how much is too much. Tell me what I have to. Tell me how short is too short. How long is too long. How loud is too long. Let me concentrate on a list. Give me something I can do. Please don't ask me to look and be dependent and thankful and grateful. So he gives us this command because this is imperative. This is at the core. Stand fast in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free. And then he goes on and says, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. So here we go. If we're going to stand fast and defend something, Ben, we got to know what it is. Okay? So we're going to do three things hopefully here this morning. We're going to look at what this liberty is. Because if we're going to defend something, let's find out what it is. And then we're going to, because we're trying to finish two sections at once, we'll see how that goes. We're going to look at its two great enemies. And the enemies of freedom are legalism, putting yourself back under the bondage of the law, and licentiousness, putting yourself back under the bondage of sin. Only two options. You can walk in the Spirit, you can be an Isaac, or you can go back underneath the law like the Judaizers, or you can go back underneath flesh like Ishmael. So, liberty, legalism, licentiousness. Liberty. It's the craziest thing in the whole wide world, Brother Hamilton. You know, we're going to talk about liberty. And the scripture is all about liberty and freedom and breaking bondage. But if you look at the world, they think Christianity is constraining and confining and controlling. Well, here's the part. Dr. Barry, here's the part where we sit right here and say, the world, they're so dumb. Where do they get that picture? Sometimes I think you and I, we should wonder where they get that picture. That picture might be coming from what we hold up as our value, the do's and the don'ts and the list. And it might come because we're not holding up the freedom and the breaking of the bondage and how great he is. And just sometimes maybe we should think about that question. But let me give you a couple verses just so we can move on. Here we go. All of these, I try to get verses that are very common, but Scripture talks about freedom. John 8:32, and ye shall know the truth. Who's the truth? We know who the truth. And the truth is going to do what? It's freedom. It's not bondage. And it's not labor. And it's not, we always try to make it such hard work. Why is it hard to live out who we are? Here's, I just do this. I'm like, okay, if he makes me a new creature and he changes my desires and he gives me a heart and he just makes all things new, why is it so hard for me to be what he's made me? John 8:36. If the Son therefore shall make you free, okay, if he does what he says he's going to do, guess what you're going to be? You're going to be free. In fact, we want to talk about freedom is why he came. When we really get his ministry started, when we see him going to and reading from the scrolls. There's the rabbi. He's going to read from the scrolls. It's Luke chapter 4. Is it Luke 4? Yeah, it is Luke 4. Luke 4. Give me that. Luke 4. He quotes this, by the way. This is a quote from Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives. That's a little like freedom, by the way. When you're delivering those under bondage. And recovering of sight to the blind. In fact, if you missed it, let me make it succinct for you. To set at liberty them who are bruised. I came to bring liberty. It is the very purpose. The very heart of the gospel, Doug, is liberty. It is freedom. So when he tells us in Galatians 5:1, stand fast, protect, hold, defend. That liberty where he made, okay, it's extremely important. Brother Roy, you know why he has to tell us? Because it's really easy to slip back into bondage. Setting people free is the heart of the message. And this, and election season, I guess you have to do this. And this freedom is not some political, economic, social, freeing the oppressed, the disenfranchised. Sometimes the church even thinks that's what its duty is. When he came, they were under the power of Rome. Miss Kathy, you know what he did not do? He did not set them free from Rome. It's not the freedom he was talking about. I was talking to a lady at work this last week, and she's been struggling. I've been talking to her for a little while, and she came to me this last week, and she said, you know, Jeremy, I've heard you, but I just want to tell you, God is not enough. You know, when the days are bad, and when you're struggling, when things, he's not enough. Okay, I've given it all to him, and here I am 2 weeks later, and I still have the same problems. Well, the challenge is what she's wanting is a Santa Claus who's going to give her the life she's planned out. And sometimes when we talk about freedom, that's what we're talking about too. Especially right now when we're talking about voting and politics and, you know, this is the way and this is the way it must be. And I want you to point out, he left Rome and he expected them to have joy under Rome. The freedom we have, Dr. Boyer, is not supposed to be the political freedom that we think we've enjoyed and the way it's been for the last 250 years. That freedom is something different, and that's what we need to look at. That's where we're going to go. I think from this verse, we can see that freedom is three things. When he's talking about this liberty, Doug, he's talking about three things. First, it's freedom from the penalty of the law. That's what he's been dealing with in this whole book. Okay, it's freedom from the penalty of the law. But you can't separate the penalty from the law without looking at the law's purpose. And the law's purpose was come that you might see the bondage of sin. Law shows us sin. It reveals sin. It helps us see what sin is. So the purpose is that it might free us from the penalty of the law, but in so doing, it also has to free us from the bondage of sin. And I'll say it does one more thing, because not only does the law have a penalty, not only does it show us the bondage of sin, but the law in and amongst itself is a burden. It's heavy. When he talks about the heavy taskmaster, taskmaster is not fun and easy. Taskmaster is driving, it's whipping, it's no break. It's constant striving, pushing the wheel, and accomplishing nothing. If the horse goes faster, he gets nowhere. If he goes slower, he gets whipped. So there are three things: penalty of the law, bondage of sin, and the burden of the law. Now, the yoke of the law, we'll look at that first. Bondage of sin. Doug, I think you've been here every time. Every time I've said freedom, you've had to be down there saying, all right, well, when are we gonna talk about this other side? Right? Be honest. That's what I'd be doing. And that's what we're going to do right here. Because I do believe we have to understand the freedom that it's talking about. But Brother Hamilton, I really do believe the Bible's written in the order it's written for a reason. And I believe there's a reason we get to chapter 5. And we hear freedom and 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 freedom before we get to this place. Because I think what we really struggle with is believing that we're free. You want to know why it's so hard to live like we are? Because we don't believe that we are. And so we need to go over this. I mean, it is imperative that we understand that when we talk about freedom from the bondage of sin, we're not talking about a moral imperative where we decide what's right. I'm going to do that with no apologies. But as we do that, I want to tie it back, Brother Tony, to the fact that let's not let go of the fact that we stand fast in our freedom. It's hold fast the liberty. So, I guess that disclaimer and warning being said, freedom from sin is not a release from the divine standard of righteousness. Okay, and sometimes that gets pictured. It's usually said this way: freedom from sin is not freedom from the moral law. And we go in, Dr. Bohr, we go in and we split the ceremonial law and the dietary law and the laws of the feast, and we take those and we separate those from the Ten Commandments. And I'm okay if you do that, I guess, but I really do think that is making it easy to understand, but it really is compartmentalizing something that we shouldn't. Okay, and here's why. Do we think the Ten Commandments first happened when he carved them down in stone? That's the first time he put them down, but man had been responsible for those long before. He just recorded them. In fact, you can go to Deuteronomy chapter 18. Not only were the Jews responsible for this, but Deuteronomy chapter 18, he holds the Canaanites responsible for it, and he said you're going to drive them out because they broke all of these laws. You see, the moral law of God is his character. Let me give you a couple verses. Romans 6:20. For when we were servants of sin, okay, that's pre-freedom, ye were free from righteousness. Okay, I'm talking about free from the bondage of sin, right? If I free you from the bondage of sin, then I don't want you to be a servant, I don't want you to be a slave. But look what he tells us. When we're sinning, we're a slave. If we're talking about freedom from bondage, then he is not going to be encouraging us to a place where we would sin again, because sin puts us back under bondage, no more freedom. John 8:33 and 34, same passage. John 8 is a great passage if you want to talk about freedom. Christ is talking about freedom in this whole passage. They answered him. Look, Abraham. We're Abraham's seed. Fib. We were never in bondage to any man. Did they not go through the captivity stage? Did they cut that out in education? We were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? Go ahead. 34. Jesus answered them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. You want to know where your bondage was? It was in the fact that you sin. So when he's talking about freedom from sin, freedom from the bondage of sin, Doug, there can't be sin, right? You can't be doing wrong. And I'll go this far. This is what happens, and this is probably out of order, so I got to be careful. So this is what happens. People will say, the core of antinomianism in the church comes from this philosophy. Dr. Bohr, he gave me a new heart, right? We're going to have to admit that, right? New heart. And he gave me new desires, and he made all things new. Therefore, the things I would desire are not wrong because he gave it to me. So I can do whatever I want and whatever it is, and it can't be sin anymore because a Christian can't sin. So it's almost like I'm my own moral authority. Okay, well, that's where it comes from. That's how the argument is made. I want you to see how it's blown up. Romans chapter 6. For he that is dead is freed from sin. Ooh, be careful now. Doug, you know what you have to do to become alive? In fact, Galatians chapter 2 says this, I'm dead with Christ. Give me the next one. Eric, give me this one. But God be thanked that ye were servants of sin. This is where we were. But ye have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered to you, okay? But you surrendered, and now you're not in the flesh, and you're not striving, you're not an Ishmael, but now you've surrendered, and you're walking by faith. Being then made free from sin, ye became, here you go, servants of righteousness. Free from the bondage of sin is not free to determine what my own right is, what my own law is, but free from and sometimes we don't necessarily like this, free from the slave master of sin makes us servants of righteousness. We're still kind of servant. But we're going to see in the next 15 minutes, hopefully, that servant's different. It's not under the whip. It's under love. Our faith grows because of love. Read that in verse 6. Galatians 5, verse 6. Faith is built and it's strengthened in that love. So here you go. We're not going to get this far, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. Kathy, work is miserable for me right now. It's just like, I come home, I'm just like, I can't, there's no air. There's not enough air to make me feel alive again. But then, I still don't get enough air, but Katie comes in because Josh gets home at 7 o'clock. So 6:55, Katie's at the house. And Katie shows up. This is true, right, Hannah? Because, 6:54, she's leaving your house to come over and see Josh at 6:55. So she comes in, and Josh comes home. And Doug, sometimes I want to just grab that boy by the ear and pull him in the other room and say, you did not learn to act like this. Why do you talk to Katie that way? I mean, I'm just going to slap him around. But Katie is like, oh, no, I'd love to. Oh, I'll do that for you. Oh, yes, I'll do that for you. But I then watch her. And Jonathan will ask her to do the same thing. And Eric doesn't, because if Eric does, then Jade smacks Eric down. It gets to be kind of fun. But I sit right there and say, do you know why Katie does all these things for Josh? It really isn't because she has to. It's because she's made him that guy. And so she wants to. Kathy, I don't know if I'll get to the end, so I'll just tell you. This is what I believe. I believe when we start pushing out law and rules, and here's a great danger, because you know what young people are going to do? They're going to come up to you and they want you to give them a rule. But as soon as you answer their question and give them the rule, they don't go to God anymore. They don't have to seek his word. They don't have to ask him in prayer, because they have a rule. And that rule makes them good. And then what they do is they get a little bit older. You know what they defend? Not the gospel, and not faith, and not thankfulness and grace and brokenness. They defend that rule that they were given. And we talk about it's a relationship, but we don't give them a relationship, we give them a rule. And Paul is bringing them to this place. And he is challenging the fact that it is based upon those rules. Don't go back under those rules. Don't go. You are liberated from the bondage of sin, but that liberation does not allow you to do whatever you want to. You're still going to be a servant, but that servant is based out of love. And that love, long-distance relationships are a danger. You know why? Because you don't see the person anymore. You don't realize what they do. You don't see how beautiful they are. You don't see their effort. Well, Kathy, when we take that list and start concentrating on the list, you know what we don't see anymore? We don't see his beauty. We don't see what he's done. We're not thankful. Grace becomes small. Pat, does this make sense? So when I get to Romans and it talks about a servant, we're now a servant of righteousness. It's not the same. It's not even close to the same. All right. Not only are we freed from the bondage of sin, but we are freed from the yoke of the law. That's his primary focus. It's his character, Doug. Okay, but the law is going to pass away. Okay, I truly, with all that's in me, would argue this. Where did the law come from? God is truth, yes? Therefore, it's always going to be wrong to lie. Goes against his character. God is just. It's always going to be wrong to murder. It's always going to be wrong to steal. God is love. It's always going to be wrong to covet. It's always going to be wrong for adultery. God is holy. Well, how do we justify replacing him with some willow wood statue? You see, when it's talking about the law will never go away. It will never be repealed. It will never be annulled. Because God doesn't change. The immutability of God, if the law is based upon his character, the immutability of God says it will never go away. We're not talking about this freedom is the right to reinvent what good and evil are. Freedom is the opportunity to not do evil. Here. I'm all over the place. Holidays are coming. That's what the holidays mean. It means we're going to be at somebody's house or they're going to be at our house. And we always have that same, relative where it's just the craziest thing. You're going to get in the car, you're going to be driving with Miss Jean, and you're going to be like, why do they always have to? Why do they always have to do that or act that way? Well, let me tell you, because Ishmaels act like Ishmael. Because they can't be an Isaac. You see this freedom, you know what it is? It makes you an Isaac. It gives you the freedom that you don't have to be an Ishmael. See, there's probably a relative going home talking about you. Why does Brother Hamilton always have to? Well, it's a different answer because you don't have to. You've been free from the bondage of sin. You're not stuck in that pattern. Free from the penalty of the law. Free from the penalty of the law, but that does not mean that it's gone and you make it up. It means that going back to the law is this. Going back to the law is, Eric, give me Colossians 2. Around to wherever that is. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days, go on, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. Here. Going back and focusing on the law, Doug, is this way. If I was to say, no man in the Old Testament was ever saved by the blood of bulls. Yes? They weren't. It was all a foreshadowing. It was a picture of what was to come. What was to come was Christ. He came, he completed, he fulfilled. Penalty is now paid. That's the gospel, right? Okay? But when we go back to the law, what we're focusing on is the shadow. It's, here's a real live guy, and here's his shadow. I'm going to sit right there and focus on the shadow and overlook the real live guy. Christ has come. We don't need the shadow anymore. We don't need the picture anymore. We have the real thing. But when we go back and focus on the law and build the list, and Miss Kathy, we're choosing the shadow. I don't want the real thing. Give me the shadow. I'm going to live in the shadow. You know what Christians are supposed to be? We're supposed to be children who walk in the light. Doug. I'm out of time. Well, let me close this way. I knew I wouldn't finish, but I thought I'd get a lot farther than this. Paul writes a whole book, explaining this. I'm not so disappointed I can't, walk through it in 25 minutes. But I'm going to try right now in 4. Double speak. I'm going to illustrate it this way. It's if Angie asks me, Jeremy, do you love me? Miss Kathy and I look at her and say, of course I love you. What are you, stupid? Double speak. Angie, do you? Of course I respect you. Have you lost your mind? Okay. What Paul is warning us is about double speak. Brother Roy, if we're not careful, what we'll do is we'll say, it's all of grace. It's about him. It's he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it. Okay, he's called us to love. Matthew, 22:40? Matthew 22:40. In this is all the law of the prophets. Romans 13 pretty much says Look, you want to fulfill the law? Love your brother. Okay, that's what we'll say. Okay? But then, Doug, doublespeak. Now, do it this way. And if you don't do it this way, you won't have my approval. You won't have my participation. You won't have me. You won't have. Let me start doing what I can do to manipulate, to push, to twist, to make it happen my way. What are you? Of course I love you. What are you, stupid? Paul is right here calling them back to live as they are, children of faith and children of the promise. But he is also warning them and us. You do damage with doublespeak. Doublespeak does this. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, verse 2, that if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. If you put yourself back underneath the law. If you start saying, this is what you can do to make yourself more acceptable. This is what you need to do to Christ profit you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised, that he that is a debtor to do that you become a debtor to do the whole law. If you want to go that way, remember the requirement of the law, the bondage of the law, the penalty of the law is perfection. Why do we want to keep running back into the cell? Why do we want to put everyone else back in the cell? We are to be people of grace who've received grace and give grace. We are to be people who show forth his love, and that is what he's setting up for him to walk through. That's where we're going to see. It is in carrying out the law of love. Well, the law of love, that means I don't have to do righteousness. Well, the law of love requires righteousness. Love demands a whole lot. You know what my wife demands of me? More than any other person on earth. You know who I'll do the most for? Who I'll sacrifice? Who I'll surrender? Who I'll humble myself for more than anyone else on earth? Brother Roy, that's what he's called us to live. That's how Christians are supposed to. Look at it, Ephesians 4. Walk worthy. Lowliness of mind, the very first thing in the list. He begins to call us, and Paul is setting it up where he's going to walk through. All right, this is what a Christian looks like. This is what a real Isaac looks like. And that's where we'll be in the next couple of weeks. Doug, we close in a word of prayer.